When North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump met at the DMZ on June 30th, hopes were high that the working-level talks between the two sides would restart in the next few weeks. However, 3 weeks have passed and still no news on when we would be seeing the next North Korea-U.S. working-level talks take place. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Adviser John Bolton began his two-day trip to South Korea on Tuesday, during which he will focus on discussing a range of issues, including North Korea. For more on when the North Korea-U.S. working-level talks would take place, Dr. Myong-hyun, research fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, joins me in the studio today. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so in regards to North Korea-U.S. working-level talks, President Trump has said that the U.S. had been contacting North Korea recently and that the negotiations will start once the North is ready. So what would that mean? I mean, is North Korea just not ready for the talks yet?
Well, I think North Korea is, from their perspective, probably North Koreans are thinking that the Americans are not ready for the talks because I think North Koreans have been very clear about what will be the preconditions for the restart of the dialogue with the United States. And those conditions happen to be the United States agreeing to have a step-by-step approach towards negotiations, meaning the two sides will agree on a small, small denuclearization step. Then United States will reciprocate by relaxing some of the sanctions measures and proceed from then on. And that was one of the conditions that North Koreans regarded very important for the resumption of the talks. But then it's clear that from the statements coming out from both sides that this fundamental gap in position between the two sides hasn't really been breached yet.
Right, especially in regards to sanctions too, right?
Exactly, the sanctions still remain in place, and the U.S. side is emphasizing over and over that sanctions will remain in place again. So I think these are none of the things that the North Koreans would like to hear at the moment. So I think there's a little bit of tug of war, so to speak, between the two sides to influence the other side's position regarding the denuclearization negotiations, the resumption of the talks. But then I think fundamentally, though, the two sides still want to meet. That's the reason why there's a news recently that President Trump actually himself announcing that he got a very positive letter again from Chairman Kim. So I think this indicates that at least President Trump on the U.S. side wants to meet with the North Korean side as soon as possible. And this, I think, is a message from President Trump to his own advisors, who pretty much have a very hard line towards North Korea. So I think despite the lack of progress in the fundamental positions, negotiation positions of the two sides, I think the meeting will happen sooner rather than later.
All right, so while that letter diplomacy is also going on, obviously North Korea has actually been strongly criticizing the joint drills between South Korea and the U.S. Command Post exercise, or CPS, which will take place this fall, saying that the U.S. has been breaching its commitment made to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during his several summits, especially the one in Singapore. So what can we make of this criticism coming from North Korea?
So the North Korean criticism that the holding of the joint command post exercise is a breach of the supposedly essentially a handshake deal, so to speak, between President Trump and Chairman Kim, the last month's encounter in Panmunjom. I don't think it's a deal breaker for the continuation of the negotiations. It's a typical North Korean behavior of upping the ante, so to speak, and in a way distracting the other side from the fundamental negotiation position that they are holding. In this case, United States having a very hard line in terms of pressuring North Korea to take a very creative and more fundamentally different approach towards denuclearization, meaning a major concession. So North Korea is essentially distracting the Americans from this. And then if, North Korea, innovation insurance policy as well, politically speaking. So if the working level talk doesn't materialize for some reason, and then the negotiation break down, that the North Koreans can justify their behavior based on this, that it was actually the Americans who reneged on their own promise in the first place, which actually led to the loss of trust. So this is a negotiation ploy on the part of the North Koreans. So I think if the Americans want to have a meeting after all with North Koreans, regardless of whether they want to have a positive outcome out of it, then I think the U.S. will have to amend their currently held position regarding North Korea's denuclearization agenda. Meaning, I think somebody from the U.S. administration would have to make a positive noise towards relieving the sanctions or becoming a very concrete but a smaller expectation when it comes to North Korea's denuclearization.
All right, then are there any adjustments that we could possibly see being made in regards to the joint ROK-U.S. drills to get these working level talks going?
So, I mean, sure, the U.S. side could make a concession with the joint drill. I mean, for instance, could delay or even cancel the exercise this year. But I don't think it's going to amount to much.
Okay.
Because the reason is, first of all, what's going on with the North Korean complaint is really more of a negotiation ploy. And second is that if the Americans make that concession, sure, the North Koreans might have might agree to have a meeting with the Americans, but then North Koreans are probably going to follow that up with, the real demand, which is lifting of the sanctions and taking a step-by-step approach. So we are going back to the drawing board anyways.
Right.
So I think the American side is conscious of that. So probably, I think for now, the Americans are going to hold on to their position and then see whether North Koreans change their attitude.
All right. Well, if the talks, the working level talks between North Korea and the U.S. don't take place this week, we know that U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho are likely to meet at the foreign ministers meeting at the ASEAN Forum in Bangkok, which is taking place on August 2nd. So is there a possibility of a high-level meeting between North Korea and the U.S. there? And if there is one, then could we consider that as a restart to the denuclearization talks?
Well, in the settings like ASEAN Regional Forum, it's typical for the ministers there, foreign ministers usually, who are there to hold sideline meetings. I mean, more or less informal meetings to discuss, frankly, about the outstanding issues that the two sides might have. So it's really very natural for Secretary Pompeo and then North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho to have a sideline meeting like that. But on the other hand, whether that's going to propel forward the stalled negotiations, I'm a little bit doubtful about that. I think the disagreement lies with the fundamental difference in position towards the format of the negotiations and denuclearization. So in that sense, I think, sure, they're going to have a sideline meeting, but then I don't think that's going to lead to, unless the American side changes
their stance,
yeah, exactly.
Dramatically almost.
Exactly,
right.
because I don't expect the North Koreans to do that. So unless that happens, I don't think this will lead to much. Yeah.
Now, another news coming out of KCNA on Tuesday was that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un supposedly inspected a newly built submarine, possibly signaling perhaps that North Korea is continuing to build submarines from which it could possibly launch ballistic missiles. So, I mean, what could this mean?
Well, when the KCNA showed the submarine alongside with Kim Jong-un, I think it went beyond just a submarine. I think the connotation there was more about the submarine-launched ballistic missile, which wasn't shown in that case, because that's actually more the meaty part of the message. Because even though it wasn't really shown there, because we know that when North Koreans last tested the major provocation back in 2017, they claimed that they wrapped up their nuclear development program by launching of Asan 15 intercontinental ballistic missile. But then a lot of experts outside of, in Korea and then also others in the United States were doubtful of the North Korean claim of completion of the nuclear development program because they knew that the North Koreans also aspired to have the so-called second strike capability, meaning the surviving nuclear arsenal to strike back in case, say, someone else attacks North Korea first with nuclear weapons. So the second strike capability in most cases refers to the possession of a submarine-launched ballistic missile, and everybody knew that the North Korean hadn't reached any development or positive development in that area. So that North Koreans are showing the submarine actually indicates that North Koreans are going to continue with the, if they had suspended the development, to continue with the development of the second strike capability, which is going to send a huge message to Washington. So the message was really about the SLBM, the submarine-launched ballistic missile, not the submarine itself.
All right, now shifting our gears a little bit. Earlier today, news reports were coming out that South Korea fired some warning shots at Russian and Chinese military planes for violating South Korean airspace. However, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that all countries actually have freedom of movement in South Korea's airspace identification zone. Now, this news comes amid obviously the ongoing trade spat between South Korea and Japan, and of course we have all the diplomatic row going on around the world. So what can we make of this incident today?
So I think what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said is very telling. That's the key phrase here to understand what really happened. I think the Chinese are referring to referring to the potential for the South Korea to join the freedom of navigation operation that's being conducted by the United States and its allies in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. And I think China has come out with this because when President Trump visited South Korea last month, in the joint press conference at the Blue House, President Moon actually stated that the South Korea might join the freedom of navigation operation. Basically supported the freedom of navigation in East Asia. So I don't think China took that statement very kindly. They want South Korea to remain neutral from this ongoing spat between China and the United States, and that statement probably fell very negatively in Beijing. So I think China is actually getting back at South Korea by conducting these kind of operations, even though the infringing party or the player happened to be Russian plane.
Right.
We have to remember that the Russian plane was flying there alongside the Chinese planes in a joint military exercise. Okay. So I think, in a way, the Russian did they did a favor to the Chinese by doing this, which actually mitigates the impact, the harshness of this behavior. But on the other hand, what the Chinese ministry spokesperson said, it makes very clear what the Chinese intends, what kind of message the Chinese intends to send to Seoul right now.
Now, U.S. National Security Adviser John Bolton began his two-day trip to Seoul today, during which he is obviously expected to meet with his South Korean counterparts to discuss a variety of issues, including North Korea. But at this point, we're wondering, what do you think is Bolton's biggest purpose of his visit to Seoul this time around?
No, I think we know that the U.S. administration officials have been saying all this week that the U.S. will remain more or less neutral from the ongoing spat between Japan and South Korea. Right. So I don't think John Bolton will deviate too much from the talking point. I think the major aim of the Bolton's visit to Seoul and Tokyo, which is part of the same trip, is to count with the support of Japan and South Korea when it comes to conducting joint patrol operations in the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East. I think that's a much more pressing issue for the United States right now. And then, President Trump has stated that the parties that benefit most from the, free and secure transit of the oil products in the Strait of Hormuz should actually put the bill for the, keeping the security there. And South Korea and Japan happen to be one of the biggest importers of Middle Eastern oil. So in that sense, I think there's the message very clear from Washington that, regardless of the ongoing export control spat between Seoul and Tokyo, and Japan and South Korea should contribute together to the maintaining security of transportation of oil in the Middle East. So I think that's going to be the most biggest message that Bolton is going to deliver in Seoul. But then also he's going to make comments about, trying to reduce tension regarding this export control issue with Tokyo. And I think he's going to try to sound neutral about this, but at the same time, express his concern that this thing shouldn't prolong any longer. So this is probably formal lip service to South Korean concern about the continuation of this export control issue with Tokyo.
Do you think anything significant will come out of his mouth in regards to North Korea, though, during his visit here?
Yeah, that's also going to be a part of his message while in Seoul. But then, given that John Bolton is probably the person with the strongest opinion about Pyongyang and its nuclear program, I don't think anything conciliatory will come out of his mouth this time. But then he's going to say that, the United States is still willing to solve this problem through dialogue.
All right. Now, in regards to the security and the military that you talked about, before. There's that military intelligence sharing pact between South Korea and Japan, also known as GSOMIA. And eyes are on whether Bolton could speak about this and perhaps play the mediator role in order to make sure that this agreement between the two countries don't get revoked amid the trade spat between the two countries.
Sure, I think that's going to be an important discussion agenda item on the agenda. But then I think I mean, South Korea's kind of hinted at possibly not renewing GSOMIA agreement. I mean, it has to be renewed every year. So I think that has really, brought up some concern in Washington. And I think it's going to, I mean, definitely, I mean, Bolton is going to ask South Korea to renew the agreement because he's going to say that it benefits everybody,
right.
all sides, including South Korea. So, but on the other hand, I think this reaction from Washington probably gave some idea to the administration in Seoul that this could be a potential way to end the export control pressure coming from Tokyo. So I think I think South Korea will make some strong noise about this a little bit. But then at the end of the day, everybody knows that the South Korea is not going to back off from the agreement because this is a very important piece
right.
of a security arrangement for the three countries here.
Right. Well, we'll definitely keep our eyes on what comes out of Bolton's meetings with his counterparts here for now. Thank you so much for your insight today.
My pleasure.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you right back here at the same time tomorrow.